It's a cold, wet, gray day in Pittsburgh. Rainwater drains into a catch basin at the corner of Michigan Street and Delmont Avenue in Beltshoover. 5 years ago, when it rained, stormwater from this hilltop made its way into the city's combined sewer system, where it mixed with raw sewage.
So, on a normal day, that will go towards the sewage treatment plant where it's treated and, dumped into the river as clean water, which is great. But on a rainy day, those systems get overwhelmed, and there's basically overflows that it dumps into, and it goes straight into the rivers.
Brandon Riley is Capital Project Manager for the Pittsburgh Parks Conservancy. He says environmental contamination isn't the city's only rainy day problem.
The other thing that's a problem is flooding. Pittsburgh has aging infrastructure, and there are some neighborhoods that are just more prone to flooding when these events happen. So it's a threat to not only property, but in some instances, human life.
Today, the rain falling in this area won't end up in the river or in someone's basement. Instead, the catch basins channel the water into a series of rain gardens that cascade down the hillside at the northwestern corner of McKinley Park.
There's some infiltration that will occur, but generally the idea is to slowly release it. If it's a larger storm event where this rain garden gets inundated with rain, it'll overflow and then run down the stone-lined channel to another rain garden. When that one overflows, it'll run to the next basin and so on. Until it gets to the large rain garden basin at the bottom of the hill.
Brandon says this whole park used to act like a giant sponge for the neighborhoods that surround it. A long-buried stream ran down the valley from Beltshoover to Bon Air.
When all this development and human intervention was built up around it, basically we rerouted that. The stream was buried, and the park is no longer functioning like it would have, naturally as a kind of a stormwater mitigation area. So how can we use the park to take away some of the stormwater in the neighborhoods around the entirety of the park and treat it internally and kind of return it back to what it typically functioned as before humans were here?
This is For the Love of Parks, and I'm Camilla Rivera Tinsley. Today, we are at McKinley Park. Its 79 acres are bordered by Knoxville to the east and Route 51 to the west, and it's one of the oldest parks in Pittsburgh. Susan Rodemaker is the former parks curator at the Parks Conservancy.
As the largest community park, McKinley serves multiple communities throughout the metro area through its athletic fields. In terms of everyday life, it serves 3 neighborhoods that are immediately adjacent.
The park has 2 main areas used for recreation. Upper McKinley has those rain gardens, a community center, picnic shelter, and basketball court. Century-old oak trees grow on the steep slope that descends 200 feet to Lower McKinley, where there's a playground, picnic shelter, skate park, tennis and basketball courts, and athletic fields. As far back as people can remember, McKinley has been the center of activity for Hilltop communities, the frequent backdrop of picnics, fish fries, family reunions, parades, and concerts. It's also the backdrop for many people's best childhood memories.
My front yard was McKinley Park on the corner of Eldora and Michigan Street.
It was somewhere you could let your kids walk to and know they were going to be safe.
That's where we spent our childhood till the street lights came on.
And we rode those bikes pretty much 24/7 as much as we could get out. We kind of forged and blazed our own trails, and we made jumps and dips and all kinds of things. And I don't know how fast, maybe 40 miles per hour, and end up into the baseball field.
As a kid, man, we used to come down to the trolley tracks and put pennies on the trolley tracks and get them ran over.
Sledding with the hills, Chicken Hill.
All 4 seasons, we lived in McKinley Park.
Especially in the summer, that was an everyday thing.
We'd come down here with like water guns and water balloons.
You could always go to the park and see a basketball game.
Yeah, I played basketball here every day in the summertime. This was the spot to go to.
We already know, we don't need no phone. I don't got to text you and say, meet me there. As soon as we get out of school, get done with our homework, we all meet in the park.
Older residents like Charlie Ellison remember a thriving, mostly black neighborhood with judges, doctors, and lawyers.
School teachers, mill workers had beautiful homes, took care of their community.
Several of the original Tuskegee Airmen even grew up here. There were lots of businesses too, which is one of the reasons Charlie's family moved here in the early 1970s.
My mother didn't drive. My dad worked. All she had to do was walk down the street to go to the grocery store, to go put clothes in the cleaners, to go get stuff from the drugstore.
Ross Chapman grew up in Belts Hoover. He remembers a real sense of community.
It was vibrant, and it was really active. It was a wonderful place to grow up.
Ross now works for the Parks Conservancy as the director of park operations and civic engagement.
Everyone knew everyone. We had this wonderful community of friends, and our parents kind of had that same sense of community and friendship.
One of the biggest events of the year was Community Day, a huge weekend-long party in McKinley Park. Charlie says it was basically a Belts Hoover family reunion.
People planned to come back and see their parents or their grandparents at that time of year because they knew it was going to be Belts Hoover weekend. And the park would be packed. When I mean packed, I mean packed. You didn't even try to drive your car up, thinking you're going to circle around and find some place to park. No.
On Friday nights, there would be a movie and popcorn. Nicole Stevens remembers kids decorating their bikes in the twilight.
Because you're going to ride your bike in a parade. On Saturday, when I say parade, it was a really big parade.
Mm-hmm.
One year, Thunderherd, the marching band Thunderherd, they came, that's from out of town.
Yeah.
Sundays were more laid back. Everyone went to church in the morning, then back to the park for the old-timers 3-on-3 basketball games.
What I used to love to watch is, the old guys out there playing horseshoes.
Yeah. Yeah.
That would be comedy, because, somebody always accused somebody of cheating.
Cheating.
I was like, how do you cheat in horseshoes?
You throw it. It was just a real part of the community.
Inside the gym at Belts Hoover Community Center, about a dozen kids teach drones how to fly.
So they're writing the code. They're doing beginning Java to write the code to make the drone do all kinds of fascinating things.
Dr. Lori Paludi isn't working with teenagers or even tweens.
These are about 6, 7, 8-year-olds in this group.
This after-school program is run by the local nonprofit Voices Against Violence. Richard Carrington Sr. is executive director, and he takes great pride in the quality of programming his organization provides.
Robotics being taught by Carnegie Mellon, or coding being taught by Carnegie Mellon, or University of Pittsburgh professors tutoring 5th graders up here, or Dr. Lori, University of Pittsburgh, teaching drones up here. Nobody has the quality of programming that we have.
Kids also get a hot meal. Tonight, it's breakfast for dinner. In the summer, the community center, or shelter house as locals call it, is the hub of Voices Against Violence's free summer camp.
Then we would do all our programming from the surrounding areas of McKinley Park and even travel with our kids down through the park. And in doing so, it gives that ambiance to kids that this is a summer camp sort of environment. We've had individuals come up and identify the trees, those that are indigenous and those that are invasive. We set up 4 or 5 gardens here right around this building to teach the kids on how to garden. And we utilize those vegetables in our salads that we eat up here.
In contrast to how large McKinley Park looms in the lives of community members, a lot of Pittsburghers have never even heard of it. And in some ways, people on the Hilltop feel forgotten, taken for granted.
Some of those trails, you fall off the side, you're going to the hospital. And there's no barriers or covering stopping anybody from falling off the side of those trails.
Richard's son, Richard Carrington Jr., remembers the trails being just as bad when he was a kid in the 1980s and 90s.
Everybody always was getting messed up because the trails were dilapidated, you know what I mean? Like they were bad, and there used to be cars, abandoned, burnt cars, like they were just on the trails for years, forever, and the city actually finally got them out.
It's not just the trails that need repair. Neighbors say the roof of the community center has leaked for years, and the building has no air conditioning.
The only room that has heat in this building is the one you're sitting in. There's no heat down there where my kids are playing right now.
In the lower part of the park, the running track is completely overgrown with grass and weeds. The baseball and football fields are unplayable, and the tennis courts haven't been resurfaced in decades.
And you can see how over time, without an investment of monies and funding, that deferred maintenance can catch up to you.
Again, Ross Chapman from the Parks Conservancy.
We want to see these amenities and these assets kind of restored and renewed for the good of the community, for the good of like health and wellness.
Before Ross joined the Conservancy, he was the City of Pittsburgh's Director of Parks and Recreation.
Given the breadth of what the city is tasked to do and any given administration, there's a huge list of priorities, right? And there is typically not enough resources to go around.
But he grew up in this neighborhood too, and he says he understands how Richard and others feel about the years of neglect this park has endured.
I think that we all see it through the same lens, for sure. There have been things that we've all wanted to see happen, and it's understandable when some are frustrated that it doesn't happen overnight, but there's a way to get to it. There really is. Sometimes it just takes time, it takes creative thinking, it takes collaboration, and it takes a vision.
That vision already exists. In 2015, residents came together to create a master plan for McKinley Park with the help of the Parks Conservancy and urban design firm Fafman and Associates. We'll learn more about that plan for the future of McKinley Park right after the break.
Are you interested in making a difference in your local park? Join the Pittsburgh Parks Conservancy's Park Champions program. Park Champions are critical to rally the awareness and support needed to ensure that all Pittsburghers have access to vibrant parks. Visit pittsburghparks.org/park champions to learn more.
The Parks Conservancy's first foray into McKinley Park actually preceded the master plan. Around 2005, the Conservancy was looking for funding to do some work in the Hill District at what is now known as August Wilson Park. Then CEO Meg Cheever called up State Representative Jake Wheatley to see if he could help.
I told him, I said, I would be willing to help try to get this money for the Hill, but I have a neighborhood over in the south side of my district called Belsuver, and they need some support for a park over there as well.
Meg said, sure, you help us get the money, we'll work in McKinley. When the funding came through, the Conservancy tackled stormwater problems at the shelter house, putting in a rain garden and permeable parking lot and restoring the retaining walls. Former Parks curator Susan Rademacher says the need for a master plan surfaced during that first project.
The community itself had been frustrated and disappointed so many times over and over, and they'd lost so much that they didn't really have any faith that things were going to happen until we got that first project done. That gave the Parks Conservancy some credibility, and it also gave the process credibility because the community was invited to participate very hands-on in that design process. We did the same thing with the master plan.
It was around the time that the Hilltop Alliance started work on a plan to turn one of Beltuver's paper streets, Haberman Corridor, into a neighborhood greenway.
The wonderful synergy that occurred with the Hilltop Alliance and the Pittsburgh Parks Conservancy around McKinley Park and the adjacent Haberman Greenway was fantastic because it brought the whole community into a planning and design process that was about knitting people together and making connections.
Hilltop residents led folks from the Conservancy and the design firms on tours of the park, showing where they used to sled, ride bikes, and play ball. They also walked north from Chicken Hill to Warrington Recreation Center at the edge of Mount Washington. On the map, Haberman Avenue stops and starts every few blocks. In reality, it's a major pedestrian throughway. A well-worn trail passes between houses and through the urban forest, taking root in Beltuver's many vacant lots. A series of community meetings crystallized the vision for the park. There would be trail improvements and forest restoration, new athletic facilities and picnic areas. The community center would be renovated, and a new park gateway along the heavily trafficked Sawmill Run Boulevard would announce to the world, hey, this is a park. Come play, explore, and be with nature. And of course, the water would have to be dealt with, especially at Lower McKinley.
Back in the very early days of the park, they called it the slack, which meant sort of still water that would be standing. So it has a history of being wet. The streams run off the hills and want to collect in that valley and run on down to Sawmill Run Boulevard. So the master plan looked at really integrating the stormwater into the site in a way that was beautiful, that conveyed it out of the high use areas quickly, getting that water organized really is the key to unlocking the potential in Lower McKinley Park.
The Parks Conservancy got right to work, applying for a grant from the National Recreation and Parks Association to make improvements at Chicken Hill. Erin Tobin coordinates community outreach for the Conservancy and says residents did everything they could to sell their project.
We were one of a handful of cities that had gotten to the final round for this grant. And so the NRPA folks came out to do a site tour, and actually we had two projects that the city of Pittsburgh had gotten to the final round. So one here and one in Larimer. And they had just come from the Larimer Park tour, and they came here, and we had maybe 4 times as many people here. And not saying that the Larimer project's not also super important, but the community really came out. One of the community leaders actually guided the main NRPA person through the park and told him about the stories of growing up here, and it was just a really impactful moment. And I think the folks from NRPA could really tell how important this project, the future of this park, was to the community because of the showing. Like, it wasn't hard to get people to come out and say what this park meant to them.
McKinley Park ended up winning the $500,000 grant. And don't worry, the Larimer Park got funded in other ways. The Conservancy's goal was to capture stormwater, and they've done that with the rain gardens we visited at the beginning of the episode. But they also wanted to leverage the project to install amenities that the community wanted.
We tried to understand what those things might be, and that's where we came up with this pavilion and the slide. And but I think people were anxious. People had just come out of the 2015 master planning process, which was intense, over a year of lots and lots of community meetings, lots of individual stakeholder meetings, and I think people were ready to just see work happen.
The timeline for the grant was tight. The money was awarded in 2017, and the project was supposed to be completed within a year. But there were problems almost from the start. The original design was too ambitious for the budget. It had to be scaled back. Then, when the Conservancy bidded out the project, most of the bids came back too high, and more money had to be raised. There were difficulties figuring out what the city could do versus what a general contractor could do. And the city's public works crew is small and is tasked with construction projects across Pittsburgh. Add the COVID-19 pandemic into the mix, and suddenly 5 years have passed.
I promise you, the community is stoked that you're here.
Erin Tobin can't contain her excitement at seeing city public works trucks parked at Chicken Hill.
Jim, that you guys are pouring something on Friday?
Well, we don't know. He's calling for a truck. But
Okay.
Yeah, we're going to pour these quarters whenever we get a truck.
Okay.
But that might be all we could do for this year, pour concrete.
with the weather, yeah.
But that slide pit, that's pretty much done down there. The stuff's
The slide? The slide. Can I go look at it?
Slide's in, yeah.
Is it?
On the park side of the pavilion, a small metal slide rests on the hillside.
The slide is the thing. It's like the recreation. It's the fun. It's like the fun part of this project. Look at that! Yay! Oh my God! We've been talking about this project for 5 years. So the majority of my time at the Parks Conservancy, this has been a project, and so it's really amazing to see it come together. I can't believe this is here. I really can't. I'm very excited.
I'm at the point I'll believe it when I see it.
Nicole Stevens has good reason to be skeptical. She and others say, over the years, the park and the neighborhood have gotten plenty of attention from politicians, urban planners, and academics, but they lament the lack of concrete action. Jill Evans lives across the street from the park. She used to work for Voices Against Violence. She now leads the Belts Hoover Consensus Group. She says it's hard not to compare McKinley to parks in other more affluent parts of the city, like Squirrel Hill and Highland Park.
I feel that we need to be able to enjoy the comforts of our neighborhood like we should. And I guess you could literally say, put more money into our area in order to improve the amenities that should be here for us.
Jill is hopeful that the Chicken Hill project will finally be completed in the spring, but she's not holding her breath. One of the most glaring examples of long-deferred maintenance at McKinley is in the lower part of the park, near the running track and football field. A metal retaining wall has completely rusted out at the bottom. Runoff polluted with mine drainage gushes through the wall during heavy rains. Erin Tobin says this is a top priority once the Chicken Hill project is complete.
It's literally falling apart, and that water just pools at the bottom, and then it just makes those fields not playable. I mean, people still play on them, the city still permits them, but they're not in great condition.
It's not a new problem. Residents say the wall has been leaking for at least 3 decades.
The fact that everybody has been pushing the blame onto someone else. They've had meetings down there, they blamed everybody, they said who was going to be responsible and what follow-up was coming.
You bring people up here and you show them what's going on and talk to them about it, and then it's a pass the buck. And it's something else, and it's something else. But in the meantime, the problem continues to get worse.
It's a terribly complicated project that has to get done. And though the city is primarily responsible for managing the park system, the Parks Conservancy has a role to play in getting everyone in a room together.
So it would have to be with, obviously the city of Pittsburgh, Department of Public Works. I think it would have to be something that is collaborative statewide. We need state funding to address that. There's a lot of different funding sources out there for acid mine drainage remediation, but I think even, pulling Alcastan, and PA American Water, and how can we look at this and make it beneficial with green infrastructure? How do we get the funding sources that exist for green infrastructure? Because it could be a green infrastructure project.
Solving a problem of this magnitude takes an incredible amount of coordination, planning, and funding. Just replacing the wall without dealing with the acid mine drainage could cost upwards of $2 million. And making sure the political will is there to allocate that money requires an awful lot of effort from community volunteers like Charlie Ellison, Nicole Stevens, Jill Evans, and Richard Carrington. Despite all the disappointments and broken promises, they're intent on keeping McKinley Park top of mind for local officials and policymakers.
We understand that a closed mouth doesn't get fed. As the president of the Knoxville Community Council, I take ownership of how we've allowed these communities up here to become. But who else is going to take ownership of it? When is the powers that be downtown realize how unserved these communities are up here?
But sometimes it's just as hard to keep the community engaged in the process.
I can't tell you how many community meetings I've gone to where people say, don't call me for these meetings anymore because nothing ever comes out of it. So which means you're losing interest at the most basic level, and that's the community itself. That's where you need to build a fire. And yet, people don't even want to come out because they've been lied to so many times.
That doesn't mean people aren't engaged. They take care of each other. Richard Carrington makes sure kids have a safe place and a good meal to eat after school. Every Saturday, there's a pastry and vegetable giveaway at St. Paul AME Church. In the early days of the pandemic, residents worked together to get a grab-and-go food stop for kids in their neighborhood instead of on the other side of busy Warrington Avenue.
As I always say when I'm praying over the food for the seniors on Mondays and Wednesdays, thank you for giving people a servant's heart.
Yeah.
Last summer, there was an informal series of events called Kickbacks Up at McKinley Park, organized by some young men that Charlie and Nicole know from the neighborhood.
They grew up together. They've gone through the gang. Now they have children, and they see why they need to have jobs and take care of their families.
So it's gotten to where they're protective of their neighborhood, and they're protective of the children and the residents of the neighborhood.
They can talk to the teenagers, the young men that have really stepped up in Belsuver. They have relationships with these teenagers, and they're trying to encourage them. They know what it is to be in the street, and they're trying to encourage them in other ways. So when they're doing activities up at the park is very safe.
1 month they're going to have a cookout. Another month they're going to have a fish fry. And as always, as Belsuver always does, it's free.
Yeah.
So they're buying and going fishing in the morning.
Yeah.
Or the day before. And easily, they probably fried 100 pounds of fish, if not more. Easily.
For Charlie and Nicole, it feels like an echo of the McKinley Park of their childhoods and a turning point for the community. Like many Pittsburgh neighborhoods, the Hilltop lost a lot of population when steel and manufacturing collapsed 40-odd years ago. Decades of disinvestment have led to further deterioration, says Ross Chapman.
When I drive down Eldora Place and I look at the homes that are no longer kind of inhabited, I look at vacant lots where there were once homes and I go, oh, that was such and such's home and that's where, they lived. And so it's a little tough to look at because it doesn't resemble what it did, 30, 40 years ago. It's just a different community. That's not unique to this neighborhood or these surrounding neighborhoods. I mean, we've seen that play out in the Hill District and Homewood and other really, really vital communities that still have so much vitality, right? There's so much energy in those spaces, in those people, on those streets. It's just, how do we harness it? How do we pull those people in and say, okay, this hasn't happened before for you, but we're working towards it.
The Parks Conservancy is dedicated to seeing the McKinley Park Master Plan through to fruition, although millions of dollars will have to be raised. In 2019, Pittsburgh voters approved a new property tax to create a trust fund for care for the city's parks. Susan Rodemaker thinks that's going to make a big difference.
I do think that the faith in the future and in the Conservancy and the city being able to deliver quality parks is going to escalate pretty readily as the park tax revenues begin being distributed, and people will begin to see very tangible changes, not just in the physical park, but in how it's managed and programmed.
With the restoration of McKinley Park come concerns of gentrification. There is a lot of vacant land here, and residents are keenly aware of the increased private investment in nearby Allentown.
I don't think any community member here would want to see this park be some sort of gateway to investment in the community that would drive them out of it. It's a balancing act. How do you make investments in infrastructure without increase in rent payments, escalating property taxes? Those things we've seen play out over and over again.
This month, Ed Gainey became Pittsburgh's first black mayor. Jake Wheatley, who first brought McKinley Park to the Conservancy's attention, is his chief of staff. The two served together for years in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives.
I mean, there's always going to be this fear or this concern that when you make improvements to a neighborhood that has lacked investment, that it will make it more appealing to people outside of that neighborhood currently.
How to mitigate that? I don't have the answer, but I know it takes a lot of people to sit around together from for-profit, non-profit, government, all of those sectors, and pull resources together and say, how can we make this happen and keep people in their homes?
I think those are all questions we're still trying to get our heads around how will we do some of this, but I think we want to make this city the most safest, most affordable, most diverse city in America, and that's going to require all of us working together, looking at all of our tools.
So working on this project made me think about equity in the parks, most definitely. My name is Janelle Young. I go by JY Originals. I'm an artist, a painter, a muralist, and I am from Beltsuver in the Pittsburgh area.
In 2018, Janelle was living in New York City and was interested in the trend of art basketball courts. They're just what they sound like, murals painted onto basketball courts.
And I knew that I wanted to do a court. I wasn't sure where, and it really happened, was kind of serendipitous, honestly. I just Googled parks that were like under renovation, thinking, oh, I'll find something that is already being repaved. And the first one that came up in Google was this park at McKinley. And I was like, oh my God, it's literally in the neighborhood I grew up in. It's basically my backyard. Man, I played basketball here a lot. So I grew up playing. One of my very vivid memories is my mom coming down with me and, shooting free throws. Like, she'd be like, all right, well, you have to shoot 100 before we can go home. So I'd be here for quite a while. I consider myself a community artist, so it was really important to me to make sure, my community was involved and the residents were involved in how this project turned out. So I went to a few of our community forums, and I just asked some open-ended questions. Some of those were, what are your memories at this park? What does it mean to you? Like, the memories that people have, just like from all the different generations, was phenomenal. I think everyone just remembers how important it was for our community to support each other and build each other up, and this was one of those places where people could do that. And the color palette is kind of the Pan-African colors, so it's red, green, yellow, and then there's black and white. And the out of bounds area says Beltsuver Pride, because that's the neighborhood. I wanted people to feel really good about it. So there is like a diamond shape in the center court, and within that diamond shape there is a circle, and in that circle it says there is victory in unity.
That's it for this episode of For the Love of Parks. You can hear more stories about Pittsburgh's green spaces on your favorite podcast app or at pittsburghparks.org/podcast. I'm Camilla Rivera Tinsley. Our series producer is Andy Cubis. This episode was written and produced by Liz Reed. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you in the parks.